up me.
Yeah.
How I dress up on
Okay. These are PJs.
for job application.
Okay. So welcome everybody. We have 7 faculty in the show. 2 are not here. That's DJ Webb, who teaches digital illustration and two-dimensional design, and Vivian Zapata, who is currently teaching a class also at Elgin. Both instructors are part-time adjunct instructors, and so have teaching obligations here and elsewhere. So those 2 artists and faculty members aren't here, but we have Nana Okore, who's on this wall here, who primarily teaches sculpture and 3-dimensional arts. And then we have Kelly Vanderbrug right here on this wall, who teaches primarily painting and drawing, and also teaches senior seminar with me. Maya Durham-Rayner, also graphic design and printmaking. And then on the outside wall is Takashi Shallow over there, who teaches, most of you probably have him for a photo, and then there's me, that's me. And I teach, I don't know, you know. Would anyone like to share anything about their work, or go first, or should we just entertain questions?
How do you want this to
Oh,
go?
that's a great question. Okay.
Maybe we could ask each other questions.
Yeah, we could ask each other questions, I suppose. I think what's always interesting to me as someone who receives the work is understanding how it was that everybody came to the decision to show what they showed. And because we didn't really operate on a theme, it's sort of just open to whatever is accessible or finished or exciting right now, or a work that you're returning to. And it's a challenge to put together because the work is so different, but inevitably there's connections, and like it's really fun. So maybe that's where we can start, is just sort of why this, and what are you thinking about, and why did you put it in the show? So it goes from all over the place. Kelly, do you want to say anything? Okay.
Sure. So why this? So this painting and this drawing, the drawing has been around, I think, since Maya and I were talking like 2017 or 2018. She organized an exhibition with a friend of hers in her studio, in her shop, called Habits, right? And this drawing was a part of that. So it started as a, just like actually an example for a drawing class where I was showing them how to make rubbings. And I started it as a rubbing, and there was just this, there was like a metal die cut piece that had a bunch of holes in it for screws that was like here and here. And there were a few other marks in it, and I just got excited about working into this drawing. And so like slowly over time, and then I go back to it, probably every year I spend some time on this drawing, just working back into it, and it's kind of become this rotting log full of life, full of moss and lichen. So I put that in actually because I had hoped to have this painting far enough along that I could show it, and I thought I would just show this, but I talked to Emily, and she was like, well, a lot of people are putting in 2 pieces or 3, so you could do something else. And she looked at the work, and she actually recommended putting these together, and I haven't really seen them together, so that's where like having a curator, having someone to talk to in making those decisions can be really helpful. Just in helping you even think about the way you group your work or understand it, kind of see it differently. So that's how these 2 things came to this show. But this is the piece that I've been working on most recently, and that I'm pretty excited about, but not necessarily more excited than this, but this is where I feel like my mind has been a little more.
Also, I love the fact that you have this set up in your painting classroom, and you tell people it's so that you don't talk to the students too much.
Yeah.
Because they just can't handle too much feedback all the time, and you need to just be busy over there working on your own painting. And I think it's a great like way of thinking through a lot of things about how to teach painting by actually painting with the students. Also, another thing I want to point out, just in case any students have noticed, we talked about these as a pair, but I didn't think that this would look good behind glass or in a frame, especially if they were shown side by side. So what Kelly did was match the depth of the panel with wood behind, so that it would finish the work on paper, which sometimes a frame is what you do, but it's not necessarily what you have to do. So especially students who are working on a budget, there's a way to like elevate a drawing and finish it without a frame, and really make it vibrate. So I love how it turned out, and the shadows match underneath and the depth matches, and so they look like a pair, and I think it's really a great look. So.
And it has like a little more, like even though it's kind of floating a little bit, like when the air moves around, it can kind of move around a little bit, so it feels a little more, like a little less formal in certain ways. It looks a lot more formal than just putting it up with magnets, and sometimes that's what you want, like just for students as you're thinking about this, like sometimes you want a quality that feels like it's like in process or in the making, or you know, like that there's a quality of thinking that's happening, and so having it up on the wall with magnets can make a lot of sense. But this, quite simple, like if I pulled up the drawing so you could look behind it or turned it around, you'd probably laugh. It's like a really funny little construction that I made. There's nothing fancy about it at all, but it does kind of do this thing.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions, or should we take questions at the end, or anything?
Yeah, I wonder how did you come the idea of this? Because when I see this, I realize it's an interesting angle to have this view. It's not. It feels like I play a video game. I'm an insect and I'm seeing the environment around.
Oh, that's interesting. Like as if you're sort of sat
Yes,
down
like,
in it.
yeah,
Low.
like that.
Well, I was low when I took the picture. I cobbled the image together. Part of it's imaginative, like the background. It's this thistle plant and the part of what's right behind it was right outside my garage. So there's this like mulberry tree and this thistle plant, and I was watching it over the course of the summer just like grow and develop, and it was so beautiful and interesting. It felt kind of dangerous and like intrusive too at the same time. And so I took the picture from really low because I wanted to like intensify that experience of its prickliness. And so so that low angle was important to me so that it didn't feel like a specimen. So it felt like you were like in it, you know?
I think it's so intriguing to see the two works as something that is a continuum. Like coming to the studio and seeing this work and knowing that it's still ongoing, and also looking at this one that has had a multi-year process. It's quite captivating to me that, you know, when we think about art, sometimes we feel like there has to be an immediacy. We have to finish it right away. We have to conclude. But I like the idea of this sort of open access, open experience where the work continues to evolve and emerge and grow over a long time, and it's quite satisfying to see that. And you know, we're talking about this earlier of how you kind of walk into what is your process. Do you ever feel like, oh, it's finished now, I'm going to pull back, or do you feel like there's room for improvement? Like, can we keep working back into it? And is there a point where you feel like it would be finished? To your mind, do you mind speaking to that?
Yeah, well, that's actually a really interesting way to put it, this idea of like, is there a place for improvement? And I do think there are things that are like more well done or less well done in a piece of artwork, right? So I think being satisfied with something that isn't working is like problematic as an artist. And it was actually, I think, something that I had an inclination toward. Like sometimes I had a lot of blind spots for things that didn't quite work as well as I would have liked, but I just, like, it worked well enough, and so I'd be satisfied with it. But I feel like now much more because I don't have a gallery that's telling me you have to have this many works by this time, like it just feels like this opportunity for these processes to be ongoing and interactive, and that I can like look back and pull out the things that I've been working on and revisit them and rethink about them. And I have like this series of paintings I made maybe 7 or 8 years ago that I've sanded back into one of them recently and started painting back into. Just like these are ongoing, evolving kinds of forms. And so, I don't know, it feels more like they're requiring different things of me over time rather than like they're not finished or they're not, I don't know, that's how I think
like
about it.
It's like a sourdough starter that you have to keep feeding. It's like, it's just when
I think so,
yeah.
yeah.
Or, yeah.
When it like waves its hands around like, what needs to happen next, yeah.
Good. Thank you. Maya, do you want to say anything?
Sure. Okay, so why this piece? I was working on am still working on a book project with Christy O'Delius, and in that piece there were some poems that she had written about kind of domestic life, and we started talking about domestic spaces and what happens in those spaces, and just like how things can be chaotic. And so initially I had planned on making some pieces just sort of in response to, and so this first piece I was kind of, I don't know, just sort of in my kitchen, right, and like looking at this wall in front of me that can be kind of an overwhelming space, but also can be kind of a calm space, and thought that'd be a good place to sort of start. So I started with that, and then started to play around with manipulating the images some, and also made some monoprints kind of in response to like the emotions and the feelings that I was thinking about, and kind of combined and merged both of those to create this space. The size, honestly, like I went to my studio space and I was like, I need a frame. It's like, here's a frame. But I hadn't actually printed it this size, and I don't know if this is the size I was thinking about initially. So it was kind of nice to print it out at this size, because it gives a little bit of the overwhelming feeling of the image that if it was printed smaller, I don't think you'd have that same kind of feeling.
Yeah.
So the size became pretty important.
Definitely. It's interesting. There's another thing just to mention also to the students, as I tell you this in senior seminar a lot too, like decide on a conventional frame size and then make your prints because it's so obnoxious when you print something or when you draw something and you realize you're going to have to cut a specialty mat or you're going to have to get a very specific size of frame. And I think I love that, like get the frame, you know what it needs to be.
Or like for me I cropped around it.
Exactly.
It was like, well, this is the one I have. Well, let me look at the image and let me think about what makes the most sense with this.
Exactly.
And this still works really nicely. So it was making some decisions with what I had, but arriving at something that I was really happy with.
Exactly, yeah, and you can kind of enter that as part of the conversation instead of just an afterthought. Yeah, and it's and also originally we hung this with plexiglass and it was too reflective, and now it's not. But I love the fact that that memory has stayed with me in terms of like this is about the size of a mirror that you'd encounter in your house, like a big mirror. And I feel like because it's almost anti-reflective, it really is striking, especially because of the glistening metal. It feels like a mirror that I'm coming up to in the nighttime, and there's something behind me that's catching the light, but the fact that I can't see my own reflection is like really interesting. It feels like a mirror, and it's an anti-mirror. It's really disorienting in a good way. So yeah.
I wonder if you could say a little more about, you said that it's a space that can be kind of overwhelming, but also calming. I wonder if you could just say, like, what do you mean by that? Like, when you think about this space, is it like the nature of, like, the duties or responsibilities of, like, cooking, staying alive, sort of as a human being that this represents? Or I'm just curious.
Oh, so I think, so I have a little one, and I feel like the task of sort of cooking or some of the repetitive stuff, whether I'm in like a great mood or not a good mood, like there are things that kind of have to happen. And so like the kitchen or that space becomes this space, and in some cases it can feel like it's a fog and you're just sort of going through and like making the things and doing the stuff. There's still some moments of beauty inside of that, even when that can be overwhelming. And so it's almost like kind of the beauty of it, the overwhelmingness of it, like all combined. The other piece that I'm working on is of like a comforter, kind of like that's on my bed, and just some interesting forms that makes. So it's kind of the same idea of like this place of rest, but also a place when you're exhausted, like, that you kind of crash into. And like, so those spaces and some of the other kind of emotional feelings around it that kind of happen on a daily basis that, yeah. So kind of a lot of complicated things sort of smushed into one weird space.
It's so interesting to me though, because it's so incredibly quiet. And like when Emily was saying that about it being like coming upon it at night in the dark, like, or at a time when there isn't a rush around, like it does feel like that to me. And so it does feel like like it becomes defamiliarized in a way that's really interesting.
Well, it's almost like almost like a disassociation. So even though there is a lot that's going on, it's like moving outside of that space. So it creates its own kind of calm.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Maya, can I ask you how, you mentioned that this is part of a book project. How does this piece function, how might you name how it's functioning differently as a standalone object like it is here, versus like it's going to be on a page in a book on a sheet of paper? I don't know, how do you think of those, name those differences, or what's it doing in this space versus in the book?
So I mean, I think in the book I might have made made it a little bit more recognizable in some areas. Also the format was different because I think I had it across a 2-page spread as opposed to this narrow image. I left more negative space for text to go in it, to be like a part of the image. So there were some decisions about that, or thinking about where I'm cropping it so there's enough room for the text to breathe. So it's actually kind of nice to think about it in a different format. So I was like, oh, okay, so different format. Okay, so I can crop it here. Like I didn't feel like I had to show the book page because it didn't have to be friends with the text in the same kind of a way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nana, do you want to say something?
Sure. These are pieces I created in 2017, I believe, and one of the reasons that I chose to include them is that I've often presented works that are large. My sculptures and my sculptural installations tend to be, large scale, immersive, and I have a background in painting, so from time to time I would, escape and go back to my painting roots and create works that both speak to color and textures while also embracing sculptural elements. So in this series, it's a series of 10 pieces, but I chose 3 that kind of felt like they were speaking to each other. I was exploring different forms of nature, the way in which nature can be very amorphous and at the same time controlled, the way in which so many forms that we see in nature resonate with us and also speak to other kinds of forms. I liked the multiplicity because that is a process that comes inherently, comes through in my work. I tend to be repetitious in how I build things, and so I wanted to apply some of those processes into my work, the labor of making and repeating, and that repetition not being mathematical or systematic, but sort of like forming and free forming at the same time. So these are results of that sort of like allowing the material to guide me, bringing in color, bringing in my painting impulses, and trying to speak to different resonances in nature, and that other people can tap into in different ways. The piece on the left-hand side, I once received a comment by a viewer who said that it looks like a woman's genitals, and that didn't occur to me initially, but I was like, wait, yeah, right, okay. But anyway, so that sort of thing. So I was very excited and to see people responding to it in different ways. I can imagine that there would be conversations that people would have with them and apply different experiences and attachment associations with these works.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Definitely. Well, there's definitely a familiarity. Like you feel like you know this thing. You know it's like a cell or part of the body or part of a tree. But because you can't exactly name it as a definitive, that's what it is, it just slows down the viewing process quite a bit. And then you kind of have to stay open to other descriptive words. Like, I always think about like how paintings before all the clouds had scientific names were so different than after that they had scientific names.
Right.
And then people became too aware that they were painting a cumulonimbus cloud, and so they would subscribe to that idea of what it's supposed to look like. And here it's sort of wandering around in the natural world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and it reminds me of like a book that I used to really love that would show kind of micro to macro images and how all of it gets repeated. And so I think as you were saying, like at one point I'm thinking about little cells, but then thinking about like constellations and so seeing those forms. Especially the one in the middle, like I love how much rhythm and patterns kind of in that. It feels like it's sort of moving off of the...
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like that middle one too feels like it's so in motion, like it feels like it's in the process of like increase as you're watching it, like sort of moving out, which I really love. Where the one in the middle, or on the left-hand side, where it's such a central image, feels like so generative, which I think like relates to the female form, kind of like it feels like a portal or something. Yeah.
To me, it's really interesting that you see your work in contrast to your sculptural work, which is always adapting to a space. This has a very defined space. I think it'd be really interesting actually to see these shown with that like materiality. Like the one in the middle, I think would be amazing if it had this sort of like crazy stuff and then just like fixes. I think the phenomena is really interesting, that the sort of phenomena of stasis and with the phenomena of movement and the implication of movement.
Thank you.
I realized the way, if I standing closer and the way I standing back there, see different stuff. One thing back there, I see the boundary. Like the middle one have no boundary, melting like with the environment. And the left one is by itself, kind of separate with the environment. And the right one have the like circle, but also reaching out. So interesting. Yeah.
One other thing that I just noticed with the one in the middle, I'm really liking what's happening with the shadow at the bottom of it.
Oh, yeah.
Star Trek baby.
Yeah.
It's dripping or-
Oh yeah, that's nice.
That's true. Yeah. I also wanted to evoke what is that reaction people have when they see clusters of things and
Like the sort of like,
yeah, it grosses you
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff.
Yeah, trypophobia.
Yeah, thank you.
I was
Thank you.
thinking about that as well. So I was hoping that some people would be so, repulsed by it that it would also generate a different kind of, visceral experience.
Yeah.
Besides the experience of the multiplicity and sort of the tensions of pulling away, or the feeling of wanting to rub your hands over it. That was something that,
Yeah.
if I were a viewer, I would definitely do.
Yeah.
yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about the mood that you had that the work may have inherited from your creation?
It's a hard question.
Yeah, well,
The mood.
sorry. Yeah, what were you experiencing you think that moved your hands?
So I don't know that there's a mood behind it, but I would say that in making it, I tend to kind of transform myself into an animal and begin to say, how would animals create? How would they build? Because I see their processes as not having a linear way of being, and so I tend to sort of, in my mind, close my eyes and feel my way through. But behind them, thinking about the time, I'm thinking about the care and love that you apply in making these things. So the mood is more like Zen. It's more like a spiritual sort of Zen, and you're forming and allowing that Zenness to take you to this place that you don't know what it's going to be. Yeah, so if that helps. Thank you.
Should we go around to the other side of the wall? We can go to the outside if you'd like. Oh, hi! Oh, you're here! I'm sorry. Do you want to say anything about your pieces? Okay, all right. Yeah, sure. Let's see. Takashi, do you want to? Oh, where?
Yeah. Hello,
Okay.
I'm Takashi. Yeah, it's toothpaste. Um, I liked action painting a lot when I was undergrad, and then I finally got around to participating in it fully, I think, through this piece. And it's been interesting hearing everyone talk about different degrees of abstraction. This one is as abstract, I think, as action paintings tend to be, which is that the subject is the motion of a toothbrush. It was a toothbrush, not a paintbrush, but the brush. And there's a lot of teeth brushing motion, I think, in there. There's like a rotation and zigzag. And then something that's fun for me, putting abstract together, is that all sorts of minutia becomes extremely important. So how far over the corner the paint should go. Some paintings, the side of the painting is painted, and it might even go to the back a little bit. This one I kind of stopped the painting right at the corner, but it goes over a little bit. We were just talking about that over here too. I think that's like a significant topic for painters. And then there's a lot of material experimentation. So Jessica Stockholder was one of my teachers. If you ever go to that gallery, Kavi Gupta, you might see some of her, she like paints objects, so it's hard to say if she's a sculptor or a painter, but she's always putting paint on odd things, and so she's always talking about you never know if the thing is going to take the paint. So this was a bit of an experiment. I didn't know. Sometimes toothpaste gets stuck on the sink and it gets pretty hard, and so I was like, I think it'll hold. And this is from several months ago, so it's holding up really well. It's cracking, which I really like. I really like seeing old paintings that have cracks, and I'm glad this one started to take that on only after a couple of months. If you look closely at it, I don't know though. I think after a couple of years, this thing might just start crumbling. I don't think it can be preserved. I don't know. we'll see.
Find out.
It's growing mold. I'm concerned about it as a biohazard because of that. So that's interesting too, to me. It had been wrapped by the previous gallery that showed it, and it had stayed wrapped since. And then I opened it up for this show, and it was a little moldy. That's interesting though I think for action painting. A lot of, I don't want to celebrate Jackson Pollock anymore than he already is, but it is interesting that there's like cigarette ash in the paintings, and I don't want to celebrate that, but I think there are infinite other ways to make that move, and so I include the mold in that type of way. I welcome it, aside from I'll ask everyone to maybe like hold their breath as they walk past it so you don't breathe anything. Okay, that's everything I have to say about it.
That is interesting though, like thinking about that idea in context of the rest of the work. And I don't think this is necessarily a truth across all artwork, but it does seem really hard to avoid recording the body in a work, like whether that's, like you said, ash in a painting, or like just your own gesture obviously is embedded in the surface here, but like even, I mean, there's that carries over, I think, in several of the works in the show, like just that the body is recorded even though that's not the initial impetus to make the work is to record the body. It does it anyway.
Yeah, like the action part of the action paint keeps going.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Did the action you were using have any sort of rule to it?
Rules, yes, absolutely. Yeah, of course. And in an artwork that's this limited, we love our rules, I think. Yeah, the rules developed over the sort of stacking of toothpaste on the canvas. There's almost like a Looney Tune quality to, like a Looney Tune explosion, I think, to the zigzag that I wanted to amplify. I have a friend who's more of a painter than me and paints a lot of like cartoonish aesthetics, and I think they were inspiring me a lot. But yeah, the zigzags came from I think well, the two rules were like rotation, loopy, circular motion, and then zigzag, those were the two moves, the two rules. They weren't the initial rules, but over the course of the paste getting stacked on, they became the rules. And then this is interesting too. Like with some of the historic action paintings, it was laid on the ground. I kind of wanted to do the whole tradition of the action painting, so it was laid on the ground, and I would walk around it and create it. So there shouldn't be an orientation, meaning a top or a bottom, but we were talking about this as we were setting the show up, that somehow every abstract still has a vague horizon to it, including this one, even though there was no, it was just on the ground. I don't know if like whatever direction north is in my basement was subconsciously in my mind as I was walking around or what, but abstracts tend to have a certain horizon. So some of the rules were intentional, and others I think were unintentional. But yeah, those are some of the rules.
Have you tried doing what Pollock did, and they just take the tube and sort of like squirt it out instead of actually applying it with a brush?
Oh yeah, well yeah. The tube would be completely emptied. The 30 tubes or so were first emptied onto the canvas before the brush began interacting with them. Yeah, it didn't go. There's also I was also getting into it, and I was kind of like brushing. Like when I was making it too. So so yeah. Paste tube to brush, or like mouth to canvas. All sorts of things started happening at one point, but then all of it compacted into a milieu, I think, during the final pass of what's now the surface. Yes.
To me, it's also interesting that it evokes skin, the color, at least Anglo skin, so to speak. And this,
It's Aqua Fresh, which has a little bit of red and blue to it.
Yeah, the last year's show, you had the vinyl floor tiles too, and I like that we talked about in that one how even with industrial made materials, there's sort of like a breakdown of the grid into a lived-in space where you don't get a perfect 4 feet by 5 squares, square by square, and you have to have some half squares or even a less, like even a more awkward dimension. And this too, I mean, just thinking about that in terms of last year's show, the interactions between human and industrial manufacturing is kind of interesting too. Like I mean, obviously paint is a material like that too, but just, I don't know, there's something about last year's and this year's that make me think more about the tension between those two worlds in a way.
Yeah, no, I like that stuff. I like Mies van der Rohe's like default beams, using the default dimension of the beam to build architecture. I'm really into how much like humanity can be combined into machine and so forth. Yeah. Yes. Oh yeah.
I'm curious, I think other materials that you approach similarly, like soap or lotion or other.
Have I? I'm interested in that type of art, but I don't paint that often. So, yeah, but sometimes I teach like a general art classes where students can paint in them if they want to, and I tend to encourage use of like traditional paint as paint quite a bit. So in those classes, I think my favorite thing that emerged from those exercises, one student focused intensely on you know that like hard piece of lotion that comes out when the lotion, okay, everyone's nodding, yes, like right? Like after it's been a couple of days since he pumped the lotion and it's hard. The student started collecting those, and I was like, that's good. That's a unique
tiny sculpture that has a lot of form and sort of like art historical meaning too. And so that was a good one. Yeah. Yep.
I think it's interesting that you told us that the mold is there, that you know it, because it's living. So it kind of begins to appear like a home a little bit. And the tension that makes, like, I do not want to think about mold like when I think about toothpaste, right? And there's this kind of clinical, clean toothpaste, and then there's this kind of stubborn liveliness or sliminess of mold.
Yeah.
And knowing that those two are together somehow, is interesting.
Yeah. Good point. It's, you know, I touched it. It's unusual mold. I think it stopped growing because it's hard mold. Like, it's really hard. It's not like a when like a fruit has little fuzz on it anymore. I think it might have grown shortly after it was packaged up in the plastic material initially, and then it's just been there ever since. I don't know if it's still growing, but I'm gonna have to be mindful, like packing it up this time and seeing how to figure out.
Just take it over to the chemistry department
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
Have them look at it under a microscope.
Yes. Yeah. Tell me.
And I think it also speaks to the unwitting co-collaboration of the non-human.
Ooh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so that the way in which we have uninvited guests coming to activate a different aspect of the work that we didn't intend, but becomes part of it.
I like.
So it's great.
I like that.
I mean, not great that we have to be with mold, but great that the work is transforming and taking on this new character or characteristic based on what the non-human elements are introducing to it.
Yeah, I might, and piggybacking on this, maybe this will be my closing statement on this. I just dealt with a stupid mold problem in my home because I live in like a radiator building, which produces like a more humidity than like a central heating and cooling building. And so the back closet of my closet where all the clothes are jammed up the most, it was getting all damp back there, and that was like a really annoying mold problem. And then this one is I welcome this one because the painting's already about kind of randomness and surface. So yeah, I mean we kind of just wait, hold on, the person.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, they went away. But that comment about the difference in like how the mold feels is kind of intriguing to me. Yeah, sometimes we welcome or don't welcome unexpected intervention, which is fascinating.
Yeah. What it is, right?
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay.
Thanks. I can go. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, DJ, about, or you can jump in. And I'll just go. I'll just say a couple things since we're here about these two. These were recently in a show that came down in the first week of December, and they were. Part of it is just they had just been shown in a different context, and I was eager to sort of just keep looking at them and take them out as a pair into a new context, and also logistically they were ready to go. So it was an easy way to pick. I tried to make a drawing for the show, and it just didn't get to the point of completion. So. Next year, you can see that next year. Anyway, these are both, the show that these were in was called Making Arrangements, and it was about the sort of symmetrical gestures of both parenting and dealing with the loss of my dad. So just the phrase making arrangements evokes my pre-existing collage making process, where I would use a lot of magnets and unfixed objects on flat tabletop surfaces, which I've shown in the gallery before, if you remember. but also funeral arrangements, flower arrangements. My brother's a musician, my sister's a mathematician, and so I just was thinking about all of the ways that we were involved in this gesture of making arrangements, and then my mom sorting through all of my dad's stuff and then sorting through camera rolls to see sort of which objects we had been passing back and forth on a screen. And that became like a really exciting thing happening on these surfaces too, is taking all of these objects from these sort of disparate environments, and some cues from my picture camera roll too, some things that I found in my pocket, some things that I've been holding on to for the last 20 years, some things that are representations of the thing that I've been holding on for the last 20 years, and just sort of layering up time and collapsing it like you could have two characters that never existed on the same timeline acting on a stage together, and suddenly you as the audience believe that it's reasonable. So that's what this is. So in the background is how these started was with a abstraction, but it's not even really that abstract. This is pretty close to how it looked, of a melted popsicle on the sidewalk that I had texted to my dad, and then other things from other backgrounds of pictures that we had shared, from my mom sweeping the bougainvillea flowers and taking videos of the wind moving around became very symbolically meaningful to her. So that's how those went in, mixed with like foam from a car seat that had gotten through the washing machine way too many times and just shredded. And so, but I liked the shape of it, and so it went into my archives as ingredients for something. And but everything's fixed with magnets, and I like the fact that there's still an animated quality, even if the composition is committed. You can imagine these things still moving around, and logistically it's great because I can pack it away easier and store the drawing flat and then put the objects in a bag, like a crime scene or something. The woman who put the show on said that she also liked it as a metaphor for like the longing to return, both in raising small children and losing a parent is that really strong desire. So, yeah, there you go. What a bummer. Just joking. I don't know what else to say, so I have to make a joke. Sorry, it's a problem.
I really like, well, one thing just about this wall, it's interesting that all the things on this wall are things that you're sort of like looking down on. But I've just been the last couple of months helping my neighbor who's in his upper 70s move out of his house.
Yeah.
And he was a collector.
Yeah.
He was a chronicler of his life, and it was chaotic. And I might open up any drawer or box or anything.
Yeah.
And, you know, me as the outsider was like, here's a snapshot into his life, but it might have things from a year ago, 10 years ago, his grandfather's. It could be a taxidermed trout and an old photograph and a toothbrush, you know?
Yeah.
And, but it reminds me of that moment of like, well, I'm getting this snapshot into something that I have to make sense of. Like, or I have to say this is all part of the same life.
Yeah.
But none of the objects in themselves is related to any other object in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, just when I think of the work of a viewer looking at this, the work of piecing together what is collected here is a really interesting kind of work to do.
Thank you.
So.
I hadn't thought of this before. I know you had talked some about how you were going to present the work and how it might be set up, and you said drawer, and now I can't like unsee it, but it makes me think so much of like the junk drawer and how every time you pull it out, things sort of move around a little bit, but each thing does have meaning, and you hold on to them because you know, it's like maybe I'll use this string, or so it has a little bit of that kind of feeling.
I never thought about it as drawers either. I've thought about them as trays, like where you lay out a lunch or transport something from one area to another, and it just becomes this temporary stage,
Yeah.
but not a drawer. That's, I mean, the whole show almost was in these deep shadow boxes to kind of reference a tray.
That's the first time I've even, like, it's even come to my
Yeah, Yeah,
mind.
me too, thank you. Good. Now I'm all into drawers. It's drawers from now on, folks. Trays are out, drawers are in, so, yeah.
When does it start to feel like it's, that you've collected enough of these arrangements to call it like a finished product?
That's a good
Or
question.
is it continuous?
It's a slow cooker, kind of like Kelly's practice. Like, I have gone into drawings from grad schools, like, so they're from 2010 or 2012, and like pulled them out, put objects over the top, and there are rules, which which it seems like all of us use to some extent too, like a rule for a mindset to adopt. And so some of it's formal, like, oh, I've got a pink and a blue, I should have a yellow, so let me go through. And some of it's autobiographical, so it's like, oh, this picture was from this one day at this one pool. I bet I have an object from a pool that I went to when I was, and sure enough, here it is, because I keep a lot. And I mean, I don't get, the funny thing is that people, when they come to see my house, they're like, I don't see where you keep all this stuff, because you look kind of minimalist, and it's there, it's all just,
Somewhere?
it's in drawer, it's in caboodles, it's in tackle boxes, it's in, like, yeah, so it's, I have it. But anyway, so I keep a lot of, like that, also sometimes it's a formal stuff, but it's also like, well, this object kind of sits on the surface, and then the watercolor is in the surface, and so I want the pencil to be kind of gouging the surface while, so it's sort of like thinking about the paper as like, okay, well now, and there's a magnet behind holding it all together, so sometimes it's that, but there's always a rule that emerges, and then usually it's just like, the show is gonna be hung in a couple weeks and we just need to wrap it up. And so, yeah, but it's always fun, because then if there's something that I was really hoping to include in this piece that didn't make it, or it's a step too far, it gives me kind of a springboard for the next one. Like, then that object becomes the priority and the rule maker that dictates.
The next set.
Yeah. But this one had a little bit more of a criteria in the terms of like the time span of like, well, this has to be sort of in the 5 years of my dad's cancer journey, like images that we had shared or objects that came from those 5 years. Not everything in the show, but this set. So yeah, a lot of melted desserts texted back and forth, and that kind of became like 6 of the pieces. So anyway, yeah. Yeah.
It may be totally opposite
I'm
of what
ready.
you would do, but I would love to see a text accompanying the piece. That is what you just said. That is, when you're talking, you're like, all these things, that the average viewer is not going to get that at all. Just it's an aesthetic experience. These are not aesthetic experiences. They're kind of memorial of a life, right?
Right.
And I personally would like to see that somehow manifested in a text or something that causes the viewer to realize this isn't just stuff stuck on a piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
Because to me, they get really powerful when we have this sort of biographical.
Yeah, I try to do that a little bit in the materials, like when you see the title card information, and it'll say like, mug handle my 3-year-old broke, and it'll have like some more clues as to where it came from, like this here, and so there is some of that in there, but yeah, you're right, and that was important to me. So in the show, that these came from, there was a lot of writing and, yeah, a lot of writing. So,
The other thing is it makes me think a lot of play, about play.
yeah.
There's a similar kind of playfulness and yet deadly seriousness of sort of national.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I'm very happy to hear that and think about Miro and Magritte too quite a bit, so.
I want to piggyback on that comment. The backstory did inform, but I felt the duality of grief and joy without the backstory, because I find these to be almost as colorful as possible, while still somehow appearing drab. So I might argue that even the formal aesthetic experience, it did contain the complexity of balancing, if I understood the narrative correctly. I'm attributing joy to raising children, but there's a combination of
Yeah,
I think it's there
I appreciate that.
without the narrative, even if it's abstract.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I wonder too, like thinking about, I think about these as trays, like I said, or board games in play, but also altar pieces. And I feel like maybe that, like altar, like arrangement of objects in a ritualistic sense, evokes kind of like a seriousness to the ritual. I mean, yeah, which it is, and my kids are very serious about their arrangements and where everything goes, and on their nightstands, it's very serious, and yeah, thank you.
Did you have like any spiritual connection at all with these?
Well, yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's always kind of I think that's definitely, whether literally or not, I feel like there's like an appreciation for like a cosmic scale, I guess, like when you put a landscaping rock that your kid picked up, and then you're like, how old is the average landscaping rock? And then it turns out it's like 1 million years old on average, and then it's like, okay, this shifts the drawing quite a bit, because I also have this broken taillight that was made in like 1997, and 1 million-year-old rock, and now they're on the same piece of paper. It kind of puts things into perspective, in a real like big sense. So so definitely that inevitably, like, I'm in that headspace a lot. So
I piggyback as well on, sorry, I don't know your name.
do you know Tim?
Tim,
No,
Tim.
Bob. No, it's Tim. Anyway,
Yeah.
you'll meet him.
When he said, I felt the same, like it was more than just objects, because as you were explaining the backstory, the background behind it,
Yeah.
and looking over these pieces, I was like, oh, these things are like shot from above, like you're looking down on them. Then you mentioned that they were inspired by your father, who's now looking down on you. With these new experiences that you're having, you were sharing old experiences and looking down on them. Now he's looking down at you, seeing all of that with your new experiences. So that's what I kind of like
That's
getting
nice.
from it, with that
Yeah.
sort of cosmic experience.
Yeah, I like it. And also just a lack of separation between those planes too. Like I feel like when you're in like deep grief, it's sort of like, oh,
a blade of grass is like, there it is. I've seen it for the first time. A brick. Whoa! Like it's just sort of like you're in a totally different mindset. Anyway, so yeah. So I feel like objects have always been a big, real big portal energy. I think in objects. So yeah. Do you want to say anything about your work? This is DJ Webb, who's did two portraits, the pair. Yeah.
Hello, a couple of my students are here too.
Yeah, great.
Do I go back in? Or?
Yeah, sure, we can go back in. Yeah.
Show me the front. Those are better than I thought. Not sure where to start.
Well, I think these would surprise me. I didn't know that you made paintings in addition to everything else that you do. So yeah. What? How does that? Like how does the doing lots like?
How do I manage all that?
Yeah. Well, and how does it serve you? How do you?
Well,
how do you find it?
Oh, I'm trying to find it and get it back. Still, because I started off, in art. My background is in art, and then getting into advertising and doing all that stuff for the big wigs and the McDonald's and Infinities of the world and all the beer guys, So now it's that passion that I kind of like placed on the shelf that's always been dormant, and now I'm ready to awaken it. So these two I did within the past couple of years, and I didn't see myself really as a portrait artist, which I found out I love doing portraits now, and I think because I like doing figures, but I'm more of a narrative artist, come from an illustration track, but I like what portraits give me. It's just, it can be powerful, and because I like narratives behind work, I like having a backstory with a face. You put a face with a name, and these have stories with faces. So this piece here, particularly, I started experimenting with Western art. So I created this character based on a person from the culture, because you don't normally see African-American cowboys and then having to be women at that time. And so I wanted to develop, this is actually one portrait from a character I was developing and pushing it a little further, called the Braided Buckaroo. And my daughter was the influence, that's her. And it's basically a story about a kid in the big city wearing a big old hat, got big old dreams. But she's different, right? She realized, like, hey, I don't need to do the normal thing that's expected of me. I can be whatever I want to be. And so she has this unique flair of being a little cowboy-like flair, who dares to dream to be a rodeo gal, something simple, outside of the big city, outside the norm. People think she's crazy. I know all this from the face, right? But there are other pieces that I have, and I actually shopped this around a little tiny bit, just some publishers with the story. They were interested in the story, very interested in the story. And some of the feedback I thought, based on the story, I thought she'd be younger. Like, well, it could be like a graphic novel, but this is a story about, she has that sort of expression because she's looking to, the story I attached to her is that she's trying to fit in, but at the same time, not concerned about fitting in. No one wants to be ostracized and isolated, right? But her eyes is sort of looking like, hey, I am confident in myself, but you guys are the ones who are the awkward ones, basically. And then I got her to pose, and she posed like that because she didn't really want to. You know, so then I attached it. So I was like, you know what? With that attitude, I know where this story is going. So yeah, that was one of my cowboy hats actually that I happen to have around the house. So, and this, another portrait I did, you know those IG? So I follow quite a few artists, and there are some artists that pop up on Instagram, and they offer these classes, and I was like, oh, this seems interesting. And I went to this one student, one teacher, because I consider myself, although I'm a teacher, I still love to learn, and so I signed on her class, and there was a portrait of this young lady she was using in a demo, and it was only like a 2-hour free class, and I just love the reference photo so much that we didn't get a chance to obviously finish the painting because it was only 2 hours demo. But I was like, yeah, I'm gonna finish that and attach my own story to it and complete it and say what it says to me. And pretty much as I finished it, it just reeked of this. Not reek as in a bad way, but she just said that she's a daydreamer. And so that ties into my messaging now as an artist. So to sort of back into it, my messaging now as an artist is all legacy focused. I consider myself call myself like a reminder artist. And so a lot of my pieces are legacy focused and try to remind people to be intentional and purposeful about their legacy and building that and how and celebrate that. And so this piece was attached to the daydreaming aspect of someone daydreaming, but a lot of times we have to go beyond just dreaming about something and we have to put it into action. And that's why this piece is called Daydreaming. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Sure.
I was just thinking, in your work as sort of an advertiser, a lot of it is about telling stories, right?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting kind of hearing how you're approaching this, like with the figure, and then how it becomes this narrative, and also wanting to sort of like have this message for other people in terms of like thinking about their legacy. So it all, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me, like how your background kind of connects into the way you're approaching these images. So that's really cool to hear.
Thank you.
So do I understand correctly, this is something you're thinking of actually building out in terms of narrative, or?
Yes.
It should. I mean, the way you talked about in the image, it feels like you should do that.
Oh,
I'm saying you should do that.
I should do it. Thank you, yeah. Hey, let's talk.
So when I saw you, I saw a little bit of a self-portrait, and it's interesting that your story matched that. As soon as you stood up there, I saw the nose, and I thought it kind of looked that way. And I have a daughter who, of course, has some types of resemblance, a black young woman. And there's something that she and her daughter called, and her sister called, the side eye.
Yes.
So similar, you get the side eye.
That's
The
exactly
side eye
what it is.
usually comes with a little bit of attitude.
Yeah.
So I
That's
can relate to that.
Yeah, that's exactly what that is. You see side-eyeing all the awkward people because she's not the awkward one. Yeah.
Thank you so
So,
much.
thank you.
And thanks so much for coming and hearing the talks. Yeah, thank you.
So I just wanted to also say, Emily, I wanted to thank you too, and I want to thank the entire, all of the collection of artists. And sometimes I come in and I try not to read the stuff.
Yeah.
And I said to one of the professors, like, whose work is this? And then she said that that's our work. So it was a good thing I didn't say I read the pamphlet first. You know? So I wanted to thank you and for the design and the expansion that's happening. And thanks for the great work.
Yeah, thank you.
Good stuff, man.
I never get back to my co-working master. And there was a
All the
kind of
extensive.
space.
Normally there's one artist.
Something like that. I looked at photos.
That's what I said, you know, I was like, 3 tours I've seen. Keep the thread, the thread.
So I went to, I went to Yeah. So we would break up.
Consider us the city. Yeah, we were like tired.
That's why we went to turn up. Yeah, that was a while ago. I mean,